At 11:47 p.m., sitting in a Walgreens parking lot, I found out my best friend of 20 years was a founding partner of the company that got me fired. She had a 40% equity stake. She helped them poach my clients. And 3 days after I lost my job, she sat on my couch while I cried about it. Let me take you back to the beginning. Dani and I met in the fall of junior year in Mrs. Calloway's AP English class. She sat down next to me, looked at my copy of The Great Gatsby, and said, "This book is just rich people ruining each other's lives and calling it romance." I laughed so hard I got in trouble. That was it. From that day forward, we were inseparable. 20 years, I need you to sit with that number for a second. 20 years. Dani was at my college graduation. She drove 6 hours to be there. She was my maid of honor when I married Marcus in 2015. She held my hand in the hospital when I had my daughter Rosie. When my mom passed away in 2020, she stayed with me for 3 days straight, slept on my couch, made food I couldn't eat, and didn't say a word about how long I cried. She just stayed. We talked on the phone almost every day. Not texting, actual phone calls, usually while one of us was driving or making dinner. Inside jokes that were 15 years old. We finished each other's sentences. When my marriage hit a rough patch in 2019, she was the first person I called. When she finally got out of a terrible 3-year relationship with a guy named Todd, I helped her move her stuff out of his apartment with my own hands. I would have done anything for Dani. And for 20 years, I believe she felt exactly the same way about me. I worked at Holloway Partners, a mid-size marketing firm, for 7 years. I started as a junior account manager and worked my way up to director of client strategy. I was good at my job, I had the performance reviews to prove it, and a client retention rate the CEO mentioned by name in company-wide meetings. I loved what I did. The termination happened on a Thursday morning in September, 2 years ago. My supervisor Greg called me in and told me the company was restructuring and my role was being eliminated. No warning. No performance issues cited. Just a manila folder with severance paperwork and a request to clear my desk by end of day. I was so blindsided I didn't even cry until I got to my car. I called Dani from the parking garage. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Oh my God, Mel, that's completely insane." She stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. She talked about how this was their loss, how I'd land somewhere better within 3 months, how Greg had always been a mediocre man intimidated by competent women. She said every single right thing. I had no idea she already knew. I had no idea she'd helped plan it. Looking back now, the signs were there. I dismissed every one of them. The first was about 8 months before I got fired. Dani and I were at a Thai place we liked, and I was venting about a competitor firm that kept poaching our clients. I mentioned the name Veritas Consulting Group because they'd just stolen a $200,000 account right out from under us. Dani went quiet. I figured she was tired. She changed the subject fast, asked me something about Rosie's preschool. I let it go. The second was a LinkedIn notification, maybe 6 months before I was fired. A guy named Kyle Abrams had viewed my profile. I recognized the name. Kyle was someone Dani had dated briefly about 5 years earlier. Nothing serious, they'd stayed friendly. I thought it was a little odd, but LinkedIn is weird like that. I ignored it. What I didn't know then was that Kyle was Veritas's director of operations. The third sign was a phone call. About 3 months before my termination, I called Dani on a Wednesday night and she didn't pick up. She called me back 2 days later and said she'd been at a work thing. Dani worked in nonprofit fundraising. Her work things were galas and donor dinners, not the kind of event where you're unreachable for 2 full days. I asked what the conference was about. She gave me a vague answer. I made a small mental note that felt like nothing. And then she was at my house that weekend, playing with Rosie on the living room floor, laughing at something on her phone, completely normal. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Dani. I found out the truth because of a woman named Priya. Priya was a former colleague from Holloway Partners, friendly, work-friendly, the kind of relationship where you like each other's posts and occasionally text happy birthday. About 13 months after my termination, she sent me a direct message on Instagram. She said, "Hey Mel, this is probably none of my business, but I was at a business expo last weekend and I ran into someone who said something I can't stop thinking about. Can I call you?" We got on the phone that evening. Priya told me she'd been at an industry expo in the city and had spotted a woman at the Veritas consulting booth, someone she recognized from a group birthday photo I'd posted a couple years earlier. The woman was Dani. Priya struck up a conversation. Dani introduced herself as one of Veritas's founding partners. Priya said, "I just felt like you should know." I thanked her and got off the phone. Then I sat at my kitchen table for about 10 minutes without moving. Then I went to the Maryland Business Express website and pulled up Veritas Consulting Group's registration documents. 4 minutes. That's how long it took. Danielle Reyes, Dani's full name, was listed as co-founder with a 40% equity stake. The company was registered in January of that year, 8 months before I was fired. I did not call Dani that night. I closed every app on my phone, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and made a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, I built the case quietly. I kept our regular phone calls going the entire time. I asked about her weekend. I complained about a parking ticket. I listened to her talk about a guy she'd started seeing. I performed 20 years of friendship while knowing exactly what I knew. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Veritas's website listed 3 founders, a man named Conrad Hess, who had previously worked at a firm that competed directly with Holloway, Kyle Abrams, Dani's ex, and Dani. I pulled up every client Holloway had lost in the 6 months before my termination. 5 of them were now listed as case studies on the Veritas website. 5 clients I had personally managed, accounts I had built from the ground up. I requested my personnel file from Holloway's HR department. It arrived within a week. The documented reason for my termination: organizational restructuring. Nothing specific. No performance concerns. No disciplinary actions in 7 years. Then I laid out the timeline. Veritas registered in January. My clients started leaving Holloway in February and March. I got fired in September. Once I was actually looking, the sequence wasn't subtle at all. I went through our entire text history. I found a message from Dani in August, 2 weeks before I was fired, where she'd asked, "How's everything at Holloway?" Out of nowhere, mid-conversation about something completely unrelated. I'd said fine, stressful as usual, and thought nothing of it. I also found a voicemail from a year and a half earlier. I'd accidentally pocket-dialed Dani during a client dinner. It had happened before. She always texted me to let me know. But this time she'd left a voicemail while I was still apparently on with the dinner. 12 seconds long. She said I'd pocket-dialed her. Call her when I'm done. And then, right before she hung up, I heard a man's voice in the background. I couldn't make out the full sentence, but the last 2 words were clear. Holloway account. I listened to that voicemail 9 times. I saved everything, every screenshot, every registration document, every client list comparison, into a Google Drive folder I labeled Home Budget 2024, so Marcus wouldn't wonder what I was organizing. Then I called Dani and asked her to meet me for coffee on a Saturday morning. She suggested Harbor Grounds, the coffee place we'd been going to for years. I said fine. I got there first and picked a table in the back corner, away from the main room. Phone charged to 100%. Documents pulled up. Dani walked in at 10:08 a.m. She was wearing a green jacket I'd complimented when she bought it. She was smiling. She hugged me, sat down, ordered an oat milk latte, and started telling me about a movie she'd watched the night before. I let her finish the sentence. Then I turned my phone screen toward her and said, "Can you tell me what this is?" She looked at the Maryland business registration document. Her face did something complicated. She blinked a few times. Then she looked up at me and said, "Where did you get this?" Not "what is this?" Not "I can explain." "Where did you get this?" I told her public records. I told her about Priya. I put my phone flat on the table and said, "How long?" She tried the redirect first. It was a side project. It barely overlapped with my industry. I was misreading the situation. I pulled up the Veritas website and pointed to the client case studies. She went quiet. Then came the sympathy play. She said she'd been struggling financially. She needed something of her own. She hadn't meant for it to affect me. I pointed to the registration date, January, and reminded her that she had called me the night I got fired and spent 2 hours telling me how outrageous it was. She said, "I didn't know they were going to let you go." I said, You were feeding them information about Holloway's client roster for months. You knew exactly what they were building. Her jaw tightened, and then the mask came off completely, and what she said next was the worst part of the whole conversation. She sat back in her chair and said, "You were never going to go anywhere at that company, Mel. You know that, right? You were comfortable. I gave you a push." The coffee shop kept moving around us. The espresso machine, a chair scraping the floor, a woman 2 tables over laughing at something on her phone. All of it completely indifferent to what had just happened at our table. I looked at Dani's face. She didn't look sorry. She looked like she'd made a reasonable point and was waiting to see if I'd concede it. That was the moment I understood, fully and without any doubt remaining, that I had never actually known her. I stood up, I picked up my phone. I told her we were done, I walked out. I cried in my car for about 20 minutes, then I drove home. I told Marcus everything that night. He'd known something was wrong for weeks and had given me space without pushing. When I showed him everything, he went quiet in the way he does when he's really angry. Then he said, "Tell me what you need." That's who Marcus is. The fallout from our mutual friend group took about 5 days to fully ignite. Dani got there first. By Monday, I was getting texts from people we'd known for years. Our college friend group, me, Dani, and 4 other women we'd stayed close with became a war zone almost immediately. First came Becca, who I'd been friendly with for 12 years. Her text, "Mel, I don't know the full story, but Dani is really devastated. Is there any chance of a conversation?" I didn't respond. Then Simone called. Simone was sharper than Becca. She said, "I heard Dani's version. Can I hear yours?" I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, then she said, "Okay, I'm on your side." She was the only one from that group who said those words. The group chat, a thread the 6 of us had kept going for 8 years, went nuclear on a Wednesday night. Becca sent a long message about how we'd all been friends too long to let this break us apart. Then Farah chimed in saying I needed to remember that Dani had always shown up for me. That one hurt, because yes, Dani had shown up. She'd been there for every hard moment. I used to think that was love. Now I didn't know what it was. I typed one message into the group chat. Dani was a founding partner of the company that got me fired. She helped them poach my clients for 8 months while I was still working at Holloway. That is not a misunderstanding. I don't need anyone to mediate this. Then I muted the thread. Farah texted me privately to say I was being unfair. I left the group chat entirely. Becca sent one more message a week later, hoping I'd reconsider. I didn't respond. I'm not angry at Becca. She wasn't malicious. She just couldn't handle the discomfort of choosing, so she wrapped her non-choice in the language of peacemaking. I know the difference. About 2 weeks after the confrontation, Kyle Abrams, Dani's ex, the Veritas operations director, sent me a LinkedIn message saying he wanted to be transparent about Dani's role at the company. I thought that was an interesting word choice. Transparent. I didn't respond to Kyle either. But whatever version of the story Kyle put out there apparently made its way back to Holloway's leadership through some channel I didn't track. A former colleague named Tracy, who still worked there, called me and said people were talking about the Veritas situation internally. That mattered to me because it meant I wasn't the only one who had connected the dots. About 6 weeks after the confrontation, I got a call from a lawyer representing Holloway Partners. They wanted to discuss what I knew about Veritas's client acquisition history and whether I'd be willing to provide a statement. I gave that statement. I handed over every document in that Google Drive folder. Not to burn Dani, I want to be honest about that. I did it because 7 years of my professional reputation deserved to be defended and because it was true. Dani's lawyer reached out to Marcus, apparently having no other way to contact me since I'd blocked her on everything. The message: Dani wanted to resolve this privately and hoped I'd be open to a conversation. I told Marcus to tell the lawyer I had nothing to say to Dani and that all future communication should go through my own attorney, who I'd retained by that point. Marcus said, "With pleasure." I also need to talk about the grief side of this, because I don't think people outside this kind of situation understand how it actually works. When a friendship ends over something small, a fight, growing apart, different life stages, it's sad, but it makes sense. The ending fits the relationship. This didn't feel like that. This felt like a death that came with a revelation that the person had been someone completely different than I knew, and those two things kept crashing into each other. I thought about her in the hospital when Rosie was born. She'd driven 2 hours in traffic and sat in a waiting room for 4 hours because she wanted to be there. She held Rosie while I slept. I have a photo from that day on my phone that I still haven't deleted. I thought about the night her dad had a heart attack 5 years ago. I drove to the hospital at 2 a.m. and sat with her until sunrise. When her dad came out of surgery, she grabbed my hand and didn't let go. Were those moments real? Was any of it real? I've asked myself that probably 300 times. Marcus says yes, probably most of it was real, and that's what makes it so much worse. Because real love and real betrayal aren't mutually exclusive. You can genuinely care about someone and still do something unforgivable to them. I don't have a clean answer for that. I've stopped looking for one. A few months after the confrontation, I was still waking up at 3 a.m. running through timelines in my head. Marcus finally said, gently, that I deserved some help carrying it. So I found a therapist, a quiet woman named Dr. Osa. In our third session, she said something that stuck with me. She told me that betrayal by a close friend often hits harder than betrayal by a partner because we don't have the same cultural scripts for it. We have language for divorce, for breakups, for estrangement from family. But a best friendship of 20 years ending like this, there's no ceremony for it, no paperwork, no acknowledged loss. You just carry it. I think about that a lot. We don't have a word for what Dani and I were to each other, and we don't have a word for what she became. What I do know is this. Whatever was true and whatever wasn't, the lie at the end was big enough to swallow all of it. She sat on my couch 3 days after I lost my job and let me cry about losing my job, while her name was on the papers of the company that helped make it happen. That image doesn't leave me. I started a new job 5 months after the confrontation, a senior consultant role at a smaller boutique marketing firm. More autonomy, better clients, comparable pay. I like my team. The work is better. Simone is still in my life, and we've actually gotten closer through all of this. I reconnected with a woman from my early career named Dana who I'd lost touch with, and she's turned out to be one of the most grounded people I know. Marcus and I are solid. Rosie is 4 now and obsessed with dinosaurs and completely oblivious to all of it, which is exactly how it should be. As of last month, Holloway Partners has filed a civil claim against Verita's consulting group related to client solicitation and proprietary information. I'm not a party to the suit. I gave my statement, and that's the extent of my involvement. Whatever happens next is between them. I deleted Dani's contact from my phone in November. Not blocked, deleted. There's nothing left to block. She doesn't reach out directly. I'm not going to pretend I feel nothing when I think about her. I don't. I still feel angry on the days when something reminds me of the timeline and I realize how calculated it was. And underneath the anger there's something quieter, a hollow kind of sadness that doesn't move. That sadness is for the 20 years I thought I had, not for who she turned out to be, for who I thought she was. About 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning out my car and found a gas station receipt in the door pocket. The date was 2 days before I got fired. I remembered that trip. Dani and I had driven out to visit a friend who just had a baby. We stopped for gas. I made a joke about the pump handle being sticky, and Dani laughed so hard she spilled her drink on her shirt. We stood in that parking lot for 10 minutes just laughing about nothing. She already knew that day. She already knew. I threw the receipt away, then I drove home. So I want to ask you this. If you found out your best friend of 20 years had helped engineer the worst professional setback of your life, and then sat with you while you cried about it, what would you have done? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know.